Okay, so hi everyone. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Karen Lander today, who's going to talk to us about supporting and engaging students during resits. And Karen's from the University of Manchester. Do feel free to ask questions as we go along. Karen's happy to take questions as we go. And I'll hand over to you. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thanks, Louise, and thanks so much for the invitation. It's really, good to talk about these things, and I'm really interested to hear people's opinions. And this kind of topic is one that I got really interested in after being a program director, actually, and kind of like following individual students about how they were getting on, and then students kind of disengaging during resits, and then kind of wondering what kind of support we had in place for them and how we might kind of help them to get to the next stage to make the most of their resit. So pretty much all the work that I'm talking about has been done in collaboration with student partners, and I'll try and highlight where that is and when that is as we go along. Okay, so this is part of a broader kind of series of work that I'm interested in on transition. So the kind of transition points at universities seem to be particularly interested in kind of access and entry points and transition to university. And our kind of challenge is to get our students to be kind of confident, to be engaged, to be connected, and to kind of continue on their studies and do the best that they can. So I'm viewing kind of transition not as a single point within the kind of the start of the university, although that clearly is a transition point, but kind of as we go along, so multiple points. So resits might be an example of a key transition point where we need to kind of support students to kind of get over that transition and on to the next part. Okay. I think I've got here moments are not isolated events. There are multiple critical transition points across the student journey. So others being things like if you need to interrupt and then take some time out away from the university and come back to university, as well as that kind of first initial point where you're getting your first grade or you're kind of moving into your house and how those things go. And if we have time, we do have some work kind of on transition to university and supporting students in that transition. Okay, so let's think then. Okay, so this is a kind of a hypothetical scenario then that happens really quite often. So a student has failed a unit, they find out, we've not had our exam board yet, so students won't have found out yet whether they need resits or not. They're often at home over the summer, they're unsure what went wrong, they're a bit somewhat embarrassed, they're disconnected from their peers because they may well have gone back home, and they're unclear who to contact and what they might do in order to make the most of the opportunity for resits. Okay, and the repercussions of resits depend really on which year you're in, what course you're doing, so it's individual to the student. So the university may or may not, so I've said, have some support available to resitting students. But our key interest herein is whether this student is going to use those resources. And I don't know if anybody has any kind of things that they want to add in, but from my experience, sometimes the students who most need it are the ones that don't access that support. And that's where we have the problem. So people, if they know what they've done wrong and they know where they've gone wrong, and they know how to move forward, then that's fine. They can make the use of those resources, but we can provide resources. But if they don't want to use them, then that's the problem that we have. Okay, so I'm thinking then as resits as a kind of hidden transition point. So certainly students may be physically away from campus, so they are remote. Quite often students have other things going on in the summer. They might need to earn money. They might not have the available space to revise. So there's a kind of a wider inequity type issue here as well. They may lose contact with their peers and with staff members. They may not know what kind of help they could ask for or what's legitimate to ask for. They may see this failure as being personal rather than an academic failure. And they need to kind of rebuild both their knowledge and their confidence in order to progress and do well in their resits. Okay, incidentally, resits, what I'm talking about here are when you've taken the exam in the first sit and then you've not passed it, okay, and then you need to retake it again. So at Manchester, certainly, you resit it for the credits rather than from the actual marks. The mark from the original exam stands on your exam transcript, but you might want to then, you need to resit it in order to gain the credits for that particular course. Okay, and obviously for Manchester, those resits happen in the late August kind of period, so just before the next year starts. Okay, so it's certainly the case that resits then provide a second chance for students. And it certainly seems to be the case that majority of students with resits kind of lack some academic confidence. They may find it difficult to admit the failure. They may not know how to or try to seek advice on how to turn failure into success. Okay, so we all know then that resits are a significant problem and barrier to continuation. Okay, so to give you an idea of the scale of the issue, so I'm a psychologist from experimental psychology. So I'm involved in teaching on the undergraduate psychology course, but I'm also director of education in my division. So that involves kind of psychology, but also audiology, speech language therapy, deaf education, and speech language therapy. So kind of a broader portfolio. But if we look purely at psychology, we have lots of students in the year. So in 2020, 23, 24, there were over 50 students kind of resitting something. Actually, in psychology, that's quite often statistics, because that's the one where it kind of polarizes people. Some people love it, some people don't love it. But those kind of numbers kind of transition also to the master's courses. So, about 7% we were looking at in terms of the MRes psychology course, which is where I was program director. But obviously the level of resits can vary by the university and by the course. And the implications for resitting also differ for different courses. So for some courses, you may need to resit individual components. Some you may just need to resit an exam, and it's okay to fail one component. You may, in some extreme circumstances, be required to resit an entire year. So there's lots of kind of nuance here in the detail. Certainly, though, the university plays a critical role in providing external support to these students. So what does the university offer students who are resitting exams in terms of support? Do they offer anything, or do they not offer very much at all? So why is it, so that's one issue, is whether universities offer support. The other issue is that kind of providing that support is not always enough, as we probably all know. Students, even if we're offered support, may not choose to take it. Okay, so sometimes students don't read their emails, or they don't read their letters. They feel a bit embarrassed about contacting staff and asking for support. They don't know what's gone wrong. They don't know whether they just don't know the content, or whether they are revising in an inappropriate way, or whether they haven't revised, or whether they've done enough, or they kind of don't really know where to start in order to facilitate getting better. So they interpret failure as evidence that they just can't do that subject. So certainly I've seen that attitude come through quite a lot with statistics. People saying, well, I just can't do it. And it's like, well, okay, you need to kind of think about how you might break it down a bit in order to get better. Otherwise, you're in danger of the resit also not making the pass mark. And they often delay seeking help until it's too late. So just the week before the exam, you're then in a panic about how to learn all these things and get better rapidly. So we can provide all this support to students, but we need to really get them on board early to take those support and to go with it and to help them, basically. So I said then that for universities, you can provide external support, and I'll go over some of those sources of external support in just a moment. But also, students can help themselves in their learning. Social cognition theory draws attention to the importance of kind of self-belief and efficacy in learning and development, so Bandura. So self-efficacious students participate more readily, work harder, persist longer, and have fewer emotional reactions and when they encounter difficulties than those who doubt their abilities. So, if we have students who have higher self-efficacy, then that can lead to kind of more engagement and more self-confidence. So maybe it's something that's really important for students to develop, and maybe linked to kind of taking those opportunities for support as they're offered. Okay, so let's get to what we did then. Okay, so I was, as I said, involved several years ago as a program director, kind of supporting students through this process of resits, and wanted to spend a bit more time looking into it. So I was lucky enough to have a Institute of Teaching and Learning fellowship, so a point one role over 2 years. It came with a little bit of funding, and it also came with a student partner. Okay, so a student partner who was employed on the project to help run it, basically. And that turned out to be key as it happened. And I'll tell you why. So the aims of our project then were to do a few things, to kind of explore the types of support that our university offers during the resit period. Okay, so we were drawing not just in psychology, but across the other faculties of the university as well. To outline some recommendations for good practice in terms of university-based support. So to try and work up, if you like, a minimal kind of level of support that we would expect courses to offer to their resitting students. So kind of as we go along, we found some really excellent examples of good practice, and we also found some not so excellent examples of good practice, where people are just kind of leaving their students kind of somewhat adrift, to come back to do their resits and have another go, but with minimum support, really. And in tandem with this, we wanted to consider ways to help students to improve their own self-efficacy. And we thought that might be key as a kind of determinant to see how they would kind of go on to use the sources of support that the university is providing to them. Okay, so let's get a little bit more detail then. Okay, as I said, I was working with a paid student partner, but I also had a team of, I think it was 4 or 5 undergraduate psychology students who were using a placement. They had 30 hours work placement. So they were working on this project as part of that. So they were getting credit for their help on this project. So we had kind of 2 basic strands in terms of what we were doing. So the first one was kind of looking at focus groups. So we had focus groups with students, kind of asking them about what kinds of support strategies they thought would be helpful if they were required to do a resit. Okay, so we had kind of focus groups across the 3 university managed faculties, and we had students who were undergraduates and postgraduates. We weren't really very choosy. We had a little bit of fun gathering ethics permission for this project, because obviously what you're asking here is students, you're potentially asking students to disclose information about the nature of their exam results, which the ethics panel thought would be problematic. And the way that we got around this was we weren't actually really that interested in why people had resits. Okay, we wanted them to think about what might help them if they had resits, but not why they had them to begin with. Okay. So in the focus groups, we had a kind of an introduction which asked students to not give information about their own personal circumstances, and they didn't need to disclose whether they'd ever had resits or not, but to instead to kind of think somewhat hypothetically about, if I was a student, what kind of support would I require? And these students, some of them had resits and some of them hadn't. So some of them were talking from experience and some were not, were thinking about what they might find useful. All the focus groups were run by other students. Okay, so they were run by other students, and one student ran the session and another two students took notes in terms of the focus groups. Okay, so I'll present those results in just a minute. We also did a larger kind of questionnaire type data study. I am an experimental psychologist, of course, so we like sending out studies and questionnaires and etc. So gathering that quantitative data that I like. We kind of sent out a questionnaire, and again, I'll give you some more information, some more details later, kind of gathering opinions about proposed support mechanisms that we'd received from the focus groups. We also did some questionnaires on self-efficacy, a general self-efficacy questionnaire, but also an academic self-efficacy questionnaire, and looking at the relationship between self-efficacy and support mechanisms. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the focus groups work. Okay, so we have data so far from 12 focus groups. And as I said, the focus groups were all run, they were an hour long, and they were run by my student partners. And they had a kind of set protocol of what they were going through in terms of the focus group. Detailed notes were taken by another student. All students who came were rewarded with a gift voucher, and all group members were only identified by a number, so they were anonymised. Okay. And as I said, we did receive University of Manchester ethics support. So first of all, they in the focus group, they had a discussion around kind of how might you be supported by the university during resits. Okay, so they had a kind of a general discussion about that. And as I said, we took notes on the discussion. Okay. In the second part of the focus group, they were provided with a hypothetical list of support strategies. And these were ones that I'd brainstormed and I'd presented to a group of senior academic advisors, and they'd added to that. So we kind of thought about possible support mechanisms. So in the second part of the focus group, they rank ordered which ones they thought would be the most useful. Okay. And then at the end, they tried to think if there was any other ones that they hadn't thought of already. So what we did was we tried to use the the focus group information to do a kind of thematic analysis. I'm not a qualitative researcher, but I have done thematic analysis in various other contexts now of doing mixed methods. So we did a kind of a thematic analysis on our very detailed notes from the focus groups. Okay, so what comes out of that? Okay, so we identified kind of three key themes then. Okay, so firstly is in terms of kind of content or clarity of expectation. Okay, so they were unsure of the content or unclear about what it is that was expected of them. Okay, so we had things like, if you don't understand it to begin with, then it's difficult to know how to improve, or I don't know where I went wrong last time. So we had kind of a whole series of kind of comments that kind of fit under this theme. And so we were trying to then think about kind of mapping those onto strategies. So things like going over example questions might be helpful, going through unknown course content with somebody else, catching up on classes for a revision of the content. So those kind of strategies might help to kind of facilitate and address the kind of content and clarity of expectation concerns. Second theme was to do with, I'm liking the words, the C words. So you'll see lots of C words: contact, connection. So again, this kind of like idea of being remote from your course and from your leaders and from your peers, and kind of suggesting that that was a problem, or that you would like more increased contact with someone at the university to help you during the resit period. So it had been really useful. I'd had someone to talk to about what went wrong. I felt out of touch and isolated. So here we go. This is kind of reflected in this theme. So kind of things that might be useful here for the university is to provide somebody for them to talk to at the university, a specified point of contact, or maybe a peer mentor, or a link with somebody else that's already been through this process. So kind of building that connection and contact, if you like. Third was confidence. Okay, so students often reported kind of low confidence associated with resits. So I just didn't know where to start with statistics. I'm always going to do badly at it. I'm not confident I know what to do. So kind of really kind of tapping into this low level of confidence. So here we were trying to think of strategies that might be useful to kind of mitigate against this kind of low confidence. Might be access to study skills classes, confidence boosting strategies, goal setting strategies, kind of building up confidence and self-efficacy in a different sort of way. Okay, so that's what came through in terms of the focus groups. This is the ranking type data. So here, these are some of or most of the kind of strategies that we gave them. And these are the different groups and how they rank ordered them. So they had to say, this is the most thing that I would like the most, and this is the thing that I would like the least. Okay. And so here we go. Revision class time, set time for revision during the actual course came out as the most thing that they would like. So maybe that was trying to preempt getting to a resit. So maybe kind of helping people revising as they go along. Maybe they're thinking that that will help you not get a resit. And then examples of previous exam questions with hints, going over your previous exam to demonstrate where you went wrong, classes over the summer to provide catch-up content, information about confidence boosting strategies, providing someone to talk to at the university, linking with a peer mentor, setting goals with an exam mentor, and then these kind of very generic kind of study skills was the least ranked useful strategy. Okay. So, we thought that was really interesting. We've got some suggestions from students about kind of what their concerns are about resits, and then we've tried to map those to what the kind of practical strategies might be to help those students in those different contexts. Okay, so conclusions then. So help with the unit content and increase clarity regarding expectations might help student engagement during resits, which might facilitate them doing better in the resits. Increased contact and connection may help increase engagement also during the resits, and again lead to better outcomes. And strategies to improve confidence would help improve engagement and self-efficacy, we're hoping. And the focus groups work, the generic stuff has been written up as an advanced HE case study, and that's the link there if you want to find out this work written up. Okay, so we were trying to just slip this in, which it may be that we have kind of we're focusing really on resits here, but this is kind of we're starting to think about a kind of a broader framework for support during transition. So kind of building on these themes of kind of clarity, connection, and confidence. And you can see that the resit roadmaps kind of tap in to all of those things. And I'll explain to you what the kind of at the end of the talk, we give some examples of where we are in terms of setting individualized resit roadmaps for students. So trying to tap into the strategies that they think would help them, but kind of broadly they fit with this within this kind of transition framework, if you like. So kind of tapping into clarity, connection, and confidence. So we might come back to this, but we'll see. Go. So in terms of the questionnaire, so this is the other tranche of the data. We currently have data collected from 441 students from across the University of Manchester. Obviously, we have loads of students at the University of Manchester, so these are from psychology, chemistry, and English. So we were trying to pick, different sorts of courses, one from each faculty. And what they did was they filled out a questionnaire about resit strategies. So we mapped the strategies that we'd had from the focus groups, and we asked them to rate how useful they were going to be. Okay, thank you. So I was just looking at the chat. So we asked them to rate how useful they were going to be, because we wanted to see with a wider cohort whether they were similar in terms of what they thought would be useful. We also gave them some free response boxes where they could add anything extra. So kind of about what they might help them during a resit, or what they could do, internally to themselves, about how to organise and motivate themselves during resit periods. Okay, so does that not work? Hang on, I'm just going to go across about 3 different slides. Oh, there we go. Oh, that is it. Okay. So then, so we had this general kind of demographic information about whether they'd done any resits and who they were and which course they were from. We had the information about kind of rating the resit, the support strategies. And then we also had, and the free response boxes. And then we also had 2 questionnaires that we asked them to complete: a general self-efficacy questionnaire with 10 items. So I can always manage to solve difficult problems if I try hard enough. So that's out of 40. And then we had a self-efficacy in higher education questionnaire, which is 5 items. So I generally manage to solve difficult academic problems if I try hard enough. And they have to kind of strongly disagree to strongly agree with each of the different statements and the items. Okay, so we had that from quite a large and good cohort of students. Okay, so first of all, I'll go with the kind of the ranking. So this is not actually ranking, this is rating. Sorry, that should say rating rather than ranking there. So they are rating between 1 to 9, okay, and each one independently. So they're not ranking them this time. They're just kind of saying from 1 to 9 whether they thought that would be unhelpful or helpful. So again, this is me putting it in the order. So you can see that there are some similarities to the previous order that we got from the focus group. So examples of previous exam questions with hints, okay, came out near the top, and the last one is top here. Talking over your previous exam to demonstrate where you went wrong was also popular with the focus groups, but is popular here too. Providing one-person contact at the university about the resit, providing summer classes, setting goals with the exam mentor, access to study skills classes. You can see this is kind of higher up than it was in the focus groups. They rated that, or they ranked that the lowest possible option, whereas here it's kind of moving up. Revision class time, that's an interesting one here. It's kind of 3/4 down the list in terms of how useful it is, where it is in the focus groups. That was the first thing that they wanted. So the first ranked item. So we have some similarities and some differences here between the focus groups and the quantitative data. Okay, in terms of the free response boxes, I've not done anything really with them. I could do some sort of thematic analysis with them, but I've not done that. I've just literally stuck them into a word cloud for you so you can get a general sense. But they're kind of, certainly in terms of, please give additional examples of support provided by the university that would work well for you if required to complete a resit. So here, they were similar themes to what we already had, kind of practice and support and accessing support. There was a couple of mentions of kind of disability and support. So kind of people who were feeling really anxious and worried about a resit and how the university might support them through that in terms of a resit exam, which didn't come out in the focus groups, but did come out here as something that might be quite interesting. And similarly here, self-management strategies. Please give examples of methods that you've used or could use to help to organise yourself during resits. And here, we didn't really get many other suggestions, but we did get that kind of theme of anxiety and stress coming through again. People finding that they were really lonely and that they were stressed and that they were anxious and they weren't quite clear how to proceed. So again, this kind of came out about kind of contacting or being in contact with colleagues or friends to help support them during the resit period, or other people that were doing something similar. So this is not a formal analysis, it's just me lobbing it into a word cloud, but it's quite interesting that some new things are coming out here about kind of supporting with the kind of the emotional consequences of being asked to do a resit, basically. Okay, so that's this one. In terms of the self-efficacy scores, we did find a significant correlation between general self-efficacy and the academic self-efficacy, as you might expect. And we did find significant correlations with some of the support strategies with both general and academic self-efficacy. So examples of previous exam questions with a hint, and both general and academic self-efficacy. So it's a positive correlation. So higher self-efficacy, a rating higher, the fact that they would like to see examples of previous exam questions with a hint, for example. Similarly, a kind of positive correlation between talking over previous exams, their previous exam to demonstrate where they went wrong, with their general and self-efficacy. Setting goals with an exam mentor, again, a positive correlation. Link with a peer mentor for support, again, a positive a correlation with general self-efficacy and academic self-efficacy. Not all of the strategies were significantly correlated, but certainly these four were clearly, they were kind of modest correlations, but they were there, basically. So what does that mean? Okay, so self-efficacy then is related to taking up resit support, but it's not simply the case that it's more confidence equals more kind of likelihood of taking up the support. So students with higher self-efficacy may be seeing the support that's offered as something that they can use. So something where they can get some feedback, they can speak to the right person, they can act on that feedback, and then they can do better in the resit. And certainly that has been found before, that self-efficacy is positively correlated with kind of support, help seeking and support mechanisms. Similarly, it may well be that low self-efficacy, or it may be as well, or instead of that, low self-efficacy may reduce the kind of taking up of that support, because students feel kind of anxiety, shame, hopelessness, embarrassment after failing. So it may well be that kind of we have a kind of a very positive thing of positive self-efficacy, but there may also be negative implications of low self-efficacy too. Okay, so let's just see. And if you look at self-efficacy, there are kind of Bandura talks about four main sources of self-efficacy, and we certainly have some work to do to try to see if those different sources of self-efficacy might map onto the different strategies in different ways. So, for example, master experiences, so you can build on your own success or failures by and build your self-efficacy from learning about what went wrong and what went right. So, talking over your previous exam might tap into that kind of source of self-efficacy. Vicarious experience, so seeing similar people succeed, makes you think I can do it too. So maybe kind of linking with a peer mentor who's been through something similar might really help you to build your own self-efficacy and go on to use that strategy. Verbal persuasion, so encouragement or feedback from others. So maybe we can get that, or we can tap into that from goal setting with an exam mentor. Physiological and emotional states. We didn't really get anything that we might definitely map onto this. Maybe kind of positive self-affirmation or something like that. So kind of people who you might be able to build your own self-efficacy through kind of feeling like you're more capable. So having these positive kind of statements. So we definitely have some more work trying to look at and unpick the self-efficacy a little bit more and trying to work out how that maps onto different strategies. Okay, so where are we currently? Okay, so what we're trying to do then is identify and highlight some examples of good practice, and we do have some of those. We are working to publish a set of guidelines for the University of Manchester for students undergoing resits. Okay, and we've got some work going on periods of interruption too. We are proposing strategies to improve self-efficacy, and our next stage, which is where we are now, is to try to implement these strategies and evaluate their usefulness. Okay, so that's where we are at the moment. So we have done some kind of fairly informal piloting of what we call resit roadmaps. But we are launching this August with a kind of formal piloting with up to 100 students from the University of Manchester from across the university. So following the exam board meetings, the first and second year exam board meetings, what we are going to do is offer students the opportunity to have interaction with an academic advisor over the summer period to work up an individualized resit roadmap. So this is trying to tap into the strategies that might be useful to that student to help to support them during the resit. Okay. So in each resit roadmap meeting, and remember we've got 3 that we've got planned. So what we're going to do is try to discuss what happened, what they find difficult, what are the barriers and that are affecting them to re-engaging or involving their resit. So what is it that they know? What is it they don't know? And we're trying to then prioritize what is the most realistic things that we can do to help them move forward, and then implement those and reflect on how well they went. Okay, so we're following the kind of fairly standard academic advising type model. So yeah, so this is the model that we follow anyway at the University of Manchester for academic advising. So yeah, you discuss, then you prioritize, then we implement, and then we reflect. So we're kind of hoping to go through all of those different stages in each of the resit roadmap meetings. So let's think a little bit more detail then. So in the first meeting, so this would be, fairly early on in summer, we're building the roadmap. So we're discussing with the student in individualized meetings what their circumstances are. Okay, we're laying out the options for them in terms of strategies for support, and we're prioritizing which ones they think would like to do. Okay, so was it the case they have no idea where they went wrong and they'd like to go over the exam? Okay, so we will work to facilitate that. Is it the case that they're just feeling really underconfident and they need to work on their self-efficacy and their confidence, in which case we will come up with a strategy in order to do that? Okay. In the second meeting, we'll be adapting the roadmap, so discussing where they've got to so far and what the continuing barriers are. We're prioritising what needs to change, implementing the revised strategies, and then kind of moving forward. So we might end up doing some of those strategies within the second meeting. So, for example, they might say in the first meeting that they want to go over a previous exam, and by the second meeting, we might have managed to pull that exam open and, and be able to give them some feedback on that exam in order to determine where they went wrong. Now, that's not going to be available in all cases because sometimes it gets quite complicated. So, for example, if we've got an MCQ exam, some of those questions might be reused for the following year. So that wouldn't be possible to go over that exam. But we do have exam essays, for example, where it's certainly they get feedback on their exam essays. We would be able to access that and achieve going over it with them. In the third meeting, obviously, they're moving towards the actual resit. So we're kind of discussing confidence, readiness, and kind of remaining kind of uncertainties prior to the resit. And so we're kind of putting those final things in place in terms of the strategies. And then kind of following up after the resit with a kind of questionnaire to find out how they liked the meetings, whether they liked them, whether they found them useful, and then obviously looking at how they did in their resits. So did they perform well in their resits? Did they do better than they thought they would? And how does that performance compare to other students who chose not to take up the resit roadmap? Okay, so that's our kind of plan. We've got a big, a big plan of things over the summer, of lots of meetings with students. So to conclude then, supporting students with resits is not just about providing more resources, okay, in my opinion. It is about partially about providing resources, because obviously unless we have some resources to offer students, then they can't benefit from this external support from the university. But it's also about building an individualised resit roadmap that strengthens their contact, clarity and confidence, so students can develop their own self-efficacy, what they need to re-engage and make effective use of the available support that we have at the university. Okay, thanks for listening. Any questions?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. I love the fact that it's just kind of a complete beginning to almost end piece of you've got the research and then you've implemented this whole, piece of work that you're then also continuing to evaluate as you go along, which is really excellent to see. Thank you. Is there anyone like to ask Karen anything? Oh, Deborah, go on.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I've been jotting down questions as I've gone through. So um, I've got a comment and I think I've got a question as well.
Okay.
So I'm coming at it really with an academic advising lens. I have a role in
Mm,
the institution, sort of overseeing how academic advising is done, um,
mm,
what falls within the remit of an academic advisor too.
mm,
And I think that Brookes is slightly different to Manchester, it sounds like, just in terms of we have two resit periods. So
mm.
sometimes we could be having students who have started their second semester and who are
Right.
also doing resit. So I've
Okay.
just had students on foundation that I've been academic advisor for, and
Mm,
I've had some students who are doing three resits while
yeah.
they're doing their next course of study. So it's a bit like trying to
Yeah.
unpick and find our way through.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the big issues that we have at Brookes is in terms of data, though, that there's no way of having a dashboard that I can find that has a
Mm,
list of my academic advisees in terms of the modules that they're doing, but also the modules that they're resitting as well. And
yeah.
so it's really difficult to unpick that until I sit down with a student and see and go
Mm.
through their individual kind of,
I
what they're
agree.
doing.
We're saying we only have one resit period, which perhaps is better in some ways, but worse in other ways, in the sense that you then hold everything until the summer. So you might have a whole catalogue of things that are resitting and that you don't know about from semester one until the end of semester two. So, that's not great. In terms of our pilot, we've got a huge amount of variability with academic advisors. So we have targeted people that we know are good at academic advising for this kind of pilot study. But I guess we have different models of academic advising in Manchester. So some faculties have a kind of a few people that that are academic advisors only, and that are for academic advisors for just that's all they do all the time. And whereas in somewhere like psychology, each member of staff has a few academic advisees to work with. Um, so, I guess what we're trying to do to begin with is try and see whether the idea works before then thinking about how that practically might be rolled out on a more general basis, I think. So yeah, we're kind of right at the beginning, but yeah, I know there's lots of challenges to come along. So,
Can I just ask, sorry to monopolize, just as a follow-up to that, on at an operational level, the
mm,
university goes quiet, I imagine, over summer.
mm, mm.
So in terms of the academic advisors you use for the summer period, are they the students' academic advisors who have been the advisors throughout the year, or
Yeah.
are they're just for the summer, are they?
So these are people who've basically volunteered because they want to try out and see whether they can support students. So I do have some year leads, for example, some program directors, and some others that are keen, that think that they can facilitate meetings on these particular dates, with students, etc. So their three meetings will be with the same person, but they're to be organised by the academic advisor and the student. They're all going to be remote anyway. So yeah,
Thank you.
it's complicated.
Thank you. Sherry?
Hi, Karen. I really enjoyed your talk, and
Thank you.
recently been thinking that I don't think we do enough to support resitting students. And on the odd occasion, I'll get a student kind of panicking, like you said, saying, I'm not sure why I failed and how do I do better? And then I tend to respond to that, but rather than proactively having support systems in place. So it's really inspiring, albeit I can also kind of see the problems logistically. I have about 60 academic advisees, but no list of who's failed and who will resit. So somehow I need to see how we could get that information to academic advisors. But I really like that you're going to do this evaluation, and I'll be very interested to hear in the follow-up to see how many of those 100 students actually took up your offer. And how
I mean, our aim is to try to do 100 students through the process. So I'm suspecting that we may well offer it to a whole load of students, and some will take it up and some won't. And our problem being that the ones who don't take it up are potentially the ones that need it the most. It's certainly in psychology, we do have a few other students who have a kind of an ongoing kind of fitness to study type plan. So they probably won't also be involved in this because they have a kind of a more tailored long-term, plan to help support them. So we're kind of probably talking about not the really difficult, super difficult resit cases, but then also just, normally they wouldn't be offered any support. So, unless they came forward, like you say, to say, I really need some support. And then they may get some, they may not get some, depending on who they ask.
Exactly. The other just comment I wanted to make, because you mentioned multiple choice questions and that there might not be a way of supporting students. And similarly for us, we've got kind of closed exam questions that we don't want to release because we often use them year in, year out. But something that's been developed for our system, which is called ExamSys, and I don't know if every department has different systems for multiple choice questions, but it enables you to link up each question with the learning outcomes of a module. And after you release the results, you can then release for each student a list of which learning outcomes they've kind of done well on, and you get like a traffic light system. So at least it points the student to which areas or which topics or which learning outcomes they haven't done well on, so they can kind of
that's really interesting. I guess on some of those we probably could do that because they're set in chunks, that's set on that topic and that's on that topic, so you could kind of break down which topics you've done well on and which ones you really need to work on, for example. We probably could do that actually. Thank you, that's really useful.
No problem.
Thank you. Did I hear right? You didn't record the focus groups. Was that an ethics thing or just
an ethics thing? We just had a nightmare with ethics. They were really difficult. And obviously I'm pretty used to going to ethics panels as well as a psychologist. So, it wasn't great. So, because obviously we've got at university, we have people wanting to do kind of educational scholarship, teaching, learning type research. And so who may never have been engaged with the ethics process. And I think if I hadn't, I would have given up, to be fair. It was really quite tricky. And this was the university level ethics, but we shall see.
Okay. And I was just wondering as well about when you were presenting the different kind of options and what they felt about each option. To me, some of those options tapped into this idea of different types of motivation, and like thinking just sort of what the students' goals might be in terms of do they just want to get through it or do they want to thrive and kind of really develop themselves. I just wonder whether you could speak a bit to, did you think about motivation as anything to look at?
I mean, I think the problem is that we probably need to do a lot more nuanced stuff, in the sense that if you've got first years that have got resits, then obviously most of them, their motivation is to get through, because the mark doesn't count for anything, and sometimes they realise that they haven't revised in the right way, or they haven't done enough, or whatever, and then that's the reason for their resit, basically. Whereas going forward, I guess they can't improve their mark, okay, on a resit. Okay, so
Right. Yes. Yeah.
that's the motivation, but I guess they can have a motivation to do better, to try not to be in that circumstance again. So that may well depend on which position they're coming from. So are they a student who's done well in everything and there's just one course that they really don't like and haven't done, well in that one? Or is it that they're kind of borderline for all of the courses? Now, for me, if you're borderline for all of the courses, so some of them you're passing and some of them you're not passing, then that's a kind of a more generic thing, isn't it? So your motivation there is different to learn the general skills in order to move forward. Whereas if it's just one that you've, not passed, then it may be that that's just really not your thing. And so you've got to motivate yourself to learn more about that thing that but you've got the general skills.
But that might also impact the extent to which they come forward to get help or not as well.
Yeah. So I mean, it's difficult. I mean, if anybody's got any good suggestions about how to get the students engaged that don't want to be engaged, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do. If you can try to build the self-efficacy, then that's the kind of the precursor, if you like, to using the support strategies. But if they don't come to the first meeting, or they don't, volunteer for a meeting, then we can't tap into even trying to build that self-efficacy.
And it might not necessarily be that they don't want to. It might be that they can't, like they're working or something over the summer.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly.
You've got to remember that. Sherry?
I was just going to suggest that after you get this year's data, hopefully, which will be really positive, you could use that as part of your kind of recruitment or web, but like advertising, essentially. You can have some quotes from students that say how useful it was, how valuable it was. So again, it might be naive to think that would make a difference to those students who just don't engage, but it might be kind of like hearing it in other students' voice.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Yeah. But yeah, I am acutely aware that obviously some students are busy working full time over the summer, trying to gain enough money to live the following year. And, the kind of having a meeting about research strategies is the kind of lower down on their list of priorities. And they might not have anywhere suitable to revise, and they might not have access, so there's a whole catalogue of kind of inequities there in terms of support mechanisms, which we can't really do much about, unfortunately, I don't think, as a university, but we can try to do some of the other stuff, is where we're starting from.
Could I just ask whether with students taking first sits, you've got different issues, because it's not that they need to find out where they went wrong, but I also think with those students, that contact, like you say, that feeling that still someone's looking out for you, and is there for support in case they need help over the summer, I think.
So I think we might also offer some of the meetings to students who are taking first sits as well. So certainly we will try to fill up with resits to begin with. If we don't get enough volunteers, we will then try to also offer them to students who are doing first sits, but with mid-circs or whatever. Usually they've got mitigating circumstances, and that's the reason why they've got the first sit. But similarly, I agree with you. It's a long time to be over the summer with no support, and then also it might be a semester one course that was ages ago, so when you've kind of forgotten some of that content by now, and it's kind of tricky. So so that's the plan. We've got a busy summer and all that.
Tough to be a student, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So
okay.
Come.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. That was really informative, and as I say, really nice to see a piece of research kind of from the beginning and then having a real impact and continuing to kind of be evaluated as it's playing out. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Okay.
Thanks. See you all soon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.